am going to first show you the agenda for the talk so that you see what the plan is. The first thing I'm going to do is start with me. Some lady came up and talked to us about injustice in the world. Well, who the hell is she and what right does she have talking about any of this? So I'm going to start with who I am and how this is affecting me or related to me so that you get an idea of why I'm up here talking rather than somebody else. We are going to then turn to the history of Iran. If you want to understand the Islamic Revolution or the Iranian Revolution or what is happening right now all across the globe as millions of people are protesting, then you really do have to start in the 20s. If you don't start with the 20s, 1920s, you're really not going to understand the fuller picture of what's going on in the 2000s and 20s. So we're going to do some history. Look at that. It's about 100 years. We're going to go super fast. And then we're going to turn to some American values. And I will tell you what I think Americans value. And then we're going to turn to normative theories in ethics. If you don't know what that is, don't worry. I will be presenting on it. And then we are going to apply those theories to Iran's actions. That's called applied ethics. And then we're going to end with some global considerations. I am not here trying to convince you that I am right and you should agree with me. I am here to be, as a philosopher would, instigating thought on the matter. So as you will see, we end this talk with a bunch of questions, and I'm not here to tell you my answers and that you should also be brainwashed to think that I'm right. I really do want to leave you with those questions. So if you are a student, I do recommend that you get out something to write with and something to write on. And as soon as a question or an idea pops in your mind, I double dog dare you to write that down and bring it up during Q&A so that we can actually have a discussion. So let's start with who I am. Here's me when I was a few years old. I was born in Los Angeles, California. I was raised by my father's mother. My mother and father both worked more than one job to make ends meet. I did not start learning English until pre-K. My parents, being immigrants from Iran, thought, why would we teach her English? She can learn that in school. So I started the education system not learning a lick of English, and my parents didn't speak English at that time. I graduated kindergarten. It was one of the highlights of my younger years because my family didn't want me to go to school in the first place. So I am a English as a second language student. I'm also a first generation to go to college. Both of my parents fled Iran without an education that was not typical of them. So I am both ESL and a first gen student. I went to UCLA. That's where I have my bachelor's of philosophy. There I did a bunch of super cool things, like I made the first undergraduate philosophy conference at UCLA, and I was the philosophy club president. I went to grad school in philosophy. I got a master's. I got a PhD. While I was in grad school, I organized the first graduate conference there of the intermingling kind. We had undergraduate and graduate students there. So I did a bunch of really cool things in grad school. And now I have all of these accolades. If you come to my house, I have all these awards and degrees and all of these things. I am a philosophy professor at St. Louis Community College, Merrimack. And the best day of my life was when my students had colluded secretly to plan a party on the last day of class. And they gave me presents, and people brought pizza and cake, and they ate this cake, and it said I was the best professor ever. And it was the highlight of my life so far. And I'm thinking, how did I get that lucky? That I get to go to school, that I get to learn how to read and write, that I get to have an education, that I get to think for myself, that I get to stand up here and tell people you should think for yourself. How am I not a oppressed woman who is forbidden from dancing in the streets like my cousins are who are still in Iran? In Iran right now, it's illegal to dance in public. It's illegal to sing in public. It's illegal for me to stand in public like this. How did I get so lucky to have the life that I have? It's because my parents fled Iran and came to America. But here's some questions like, why did they leave Iran and why did they come to America? It is now the part where we're going to go to history. So we're going to start in the 1920s and we're going to go through 100 years of Iranian history in like 7 minutes. So according to a really smart guy who's been studying this for his entire life, Dr. Harris, it turns out that thousands of families fled Iran when my family fled Iran. My story is not a special story. Thousands, apparently over 35,000 Iranians left within a 10-year gap. And when you look at the immigration patterns out of Iran, most of them come to America, maybe because this is advertised as the land of the free. So what we're going to do is learn what's been going on in Iran. If you want to understand the government in Iran, all you need to learn about, for the most part, is these four men. These four men have ran Iran during one point or another for the last 100 years. So think about how many presidents we've had in 100 years, if you think presidents are actually in charge of the country. These are how many Iranians have had as far as leadership goes. So we're going to go down pretty quickly to understand what's been going on over there. I'm not going to talk about everything. So we're going to leave some facts out. And if you want us to go backwards, then please just jot down some thoughts, and then I'll be able to go back and fill in some gaps. So it all started with 1921. Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States all worked together to help create a monarchy, a new kind of government in Iran. And they helped this man, who is the military guy, Reza Shah. Shah literally means king, by the way. So if Shah comes up, it is a title, not a name. And so Reza Shah becomes the king of Iran, and there is a monarchy established. In 1935, Persia, which is what the country was called, is renamed to Iran. And the renaming of something is kind of like claiming it as a new thing. For example, lots of people, when they have a come to Jesus moment, they take on a new name. And the reason for that is to establish a sort of newhood or a revolution, so that when you name something, you are saying this is a new thing. The hijab is banned in 1936. What is the hijab? The hijab is the requirement for a woman to cover her hair and the body of her silhouette. Now we're thinking about it in terms of womanhood. There is the idea of modesty in Islam for both men and women, but when it's considered what modesty is as a woman, the symbol is covering her body and her hair. So when I say that the hijab is banned in 1936, it means that it is outlawed. If you are a practicing Muslim and you believe that it is your job to be modest, and you believe that you want to cover up, you're no longer allowed to. So right now, if you look at France and other places in Europe, they are banning the hijab. Not necessarily saying that no Islamic people can come here, but the thing Muslim people believe they need to do is banned. And so it's an indirect oppression. So the hijab is banned in 1936 and is banned until 1941. If you're familiar with the 40s or global history, you know that this is when Hitler is rising to power and people in Austria are voting to bring Hitler to power. So we are talking about Nazi power in the background, but I'm going to ignore all of that terrible history to focus on Iran. Russia and the United Kingdom are afraid that the Iranian government is going to band together with the Nazi power, and then the United Kingdom and Russia and America would have even less power than they do over the Nazi power. So in 1941, Russia and the United Kingdom worked together to get Reza Shah kicked out. And Reza Shah says, I understand that the people want me to leave, and so I will. He willingly leaves Iran and leaves the power to his son. His son is that gentleman on the right. 1941, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi takes the throne from his father. And these two gentlemen are what they're referring to if you hear or see in history books what's referred to as the Pahlavi era. So these two men, father and son, and they rule for many years, and it's called the Pahlavi era. So that gentleman on the right takes the throne in 1941. World War II ends in 1945. There's a bunch of unrest amongst the civilians in Iran. Lots of people want to practice Islam, and for them, it means wearing the hijab. But the hijab has been outlawed, and Muslims are being oppressed. And so coming to power is this man whose last name is Mossadegh. So Mossadegh gets a huge following from the Islamic scholars, and he is rising to power. It's not the case that they want to make the hijab a requirement, but they want to eliminate all of the negative stigma for wearing the hijab or for practicing Islam. But the United States gets involved and essentially squashes that uprising. And instead, they help secure the power for Mohammad Reza Shah. And that's going on in the 50s. In 1963, with the help of the United States, the Iranian government moves the big dissenter of the Pahlavi era into imprisonment. After a year, he is then exiled. So the guy on the bottom right is super important, Khomeini. He's sometimes referred to as Ayatollah Khomeini, and he is in exile starting in 1964. So he kind of goes away and lets the Pahlavi era continue managing. My mom was born in 1964. My mom grew up in that's my mom, was growing up in much in a way that I grow up now. There is freedom, there is secular people, there are people going to school, there are people going into the workforce. This is one of the first Iranian universities where my mom thought she would be going. There, they teach you English and all sorts of really cool curriculum. The women in Iran that had the money to afford to kind of go to utilize these government services were flourishing. The country was flourishing. They were getting new roads, new pavements, new buildings, new hospitals, new schools. Women were taking jobs as professors, as judges, as surgeons. And they were also seen as beauty icons with lots of fashion. These are actual magazines during that time. The United States and Iran were, as people say in history books, in bed together. They were sharing values, they were sharing money, they were doing lots of ally work. In 77, Mohammad Reza comes to America. In 77, President Carter goes to Iran. So they are tight. All right, well, what's going on? Like I said, some of the stuff about women getting the ability to go to school, women going into parliament, women got the right to vote in 63, and there was a huge economic bloom. But from the sidelines, I should speak as somebody else and say, don't think that this is a good thing. Because if you think that women should be rearing their children, not going off into the workforce, then this is bad. If you think that Westernization and Michael Jackson music and Madonna music is going to create sexual immorality, then this is bad. But this is what was happening. Madonna and Michael Jackson were playing through the earbuds of the youth. People were starting to free think and study for themselves, think for themselves. They were becoming more secular. It's pissing off this guy, Ayatollah Khomeini, who is a huge advocate of Islam, translated by him. Now, when I say Islam, you have to be really careful because I'm talking about a very particular denomination of Islam, the Shiites, and I'm also talking about a very particular interpretation of what Shiite Muslim even means. But this guy thinks he knows what Islam means, and he also thinks that it is his moral duty on earth to create a society in which everyone must abide by it. Well, he is talking to Jimmy Carter and the Carter administration from the 60s, but we've got an FBI document in 78 explaining that Ayatollah Khomeini is asking the United States to help him regain power of Iran and not to worry, America can still benefit from the natural resources. So here's a bunch of other things that happened. In 78, from Paris, exiled from Iran, Khomeini writes a bunch of letters and articles and gets a huge rising. All of the Islamic scholars that are living in Iran start to protest. Now, the government comes in and basically just shoots people. But the Muslims believe that if they die in the name of God, then they have a special place reserved in heaven for them. And so this martyrdom idea does not scare the Islamic people. The Islamic people are willing to die for God. And they believe that when they're marching to bring back Islam to the state, that that's what they're supposed to be doing. Now, in in 79, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi decides he's going to leave Iran because the unrest is too great. People are attacking his castle, people are shooting each other in the streets, and he decides he's going to flee. So he does. And under that time, during that time, the Iranian government was having a huge military backing by the United States. And as soon as Pahlavi leaves, the Iranian military, which was really the US funded, whatever they funded, decides that they're going to surrender the power to Khomeini. So Khomeini comes back and becomes the supreme leader by 79. By the end of 1979, Khomeini is the supreme leader of Iran. So there's these two guys that had a pivotal moment in 1979. One of them was westernizing Iran, and the other one had the goal of Islamifying Iran. Now, you might, because you have American values, think, oh, well, the top guy, that's the good guy. He was opening up schools. He was letting women vote. The bottom guy, he's a bad guy. But that's not necessarily true. So I read this book by this woman who had fled Iran the same night that my parents fled Iran. So that's pretty cool. And after 14 years in America, after working at Princeton, for example, she goes back to Iran. She sees all of the things that are going on. She writes this amazing book, bottom left-hand corner, and she explains how women were oppressed during the Pahlavi era because they were forbidden from doing what they wanted to do. Some women wanted to practice Islam, and the government was saying, you're not allowed to. And later, under Khomeini, women are oppressed under the Islamic Republic. If you don't want to be Islamic, you are still forced to be Islamic. So I know in America, we talk about women having a right to choose what happens to their bodies. And you and I in America, we're talking about whether it makes sense to make ectopic pregnancy legal or immoral. But what they're fighting for is just the right to be in public without covering their hair. And under both of these eras, so basically during the last 100 years, no matter whose side you're on, women have no choice in how they dress. So we're not even talking about abortion or sex. We're just talking about your clothes. For the last however many years, since 1979 until now, these people on the screen is who have run Iran. The top two, those are the supreme leaders. The supreme leaders can do anything they want, including add a law, change a law, or delete a law without asking anybody. Those are supreme leaders. So yes, there are presidents in Iran, and yes, the presidents are voted for. However, the supreme leaders decide who can be voted for, and they can also veto the voted into power president. So the supreme leaders, top two guys, really have supreme leadership. So since 79, two people have run everything that happens in Iran, and those are the top two right there. Since 1979, the legal age for a woman to get married has been reduced to 9. However, younger is possible if her father agrees. The 1975 Family Protection Act was declared voided. So that means that if a husband decides his wife is not pleasing him sufficiently for any reason, sexually or otherwise, he can write her a letter and say, I'm divorcing you, and leave, and that's that. Automatic custody goes to the groom or to the husband. The woman would have to fight to get to see her children, even if she did no wrong. Once a man decides he's getting a divorce, that's it. But for a woman to get a divorce is very complicated and almost never happens. She would have to go to an Islamic court. It's this terrible process. Also, a woman cannot be raped by her husband. A husband owns the woman. It is his property. She takes his name. She lives in his house. There's no such thing as raping your wife. Women cannot go in public without a veil. They can't sing. They can't dance. No one's allowed to listen to Western music. Alcohol is abandoned. So there's no bars in Iran. Alcohol does not exist in the country. And for a woman to get married or to obtain a passport or to leave the country, she needs permission from her father or her older brother or her husband. Women and men do not go to class together, so this is literally illegal. And that explains why lots of people have left Iran. It also explains why lots of people have come to America. 2 to 3 million people have fled Iran during this time. As for the people who stayed, they are highly oppressed, especially the women. They are taunted, they are harassed, they are beaten, they are raped, they are tortured, they are criticized for almost every single thing that they do in the public eye. And we know this. And there are facts that under the Iranian Islamic Republic, the government is raping, torturing, murdering, kidnapping. There's proof. The political prisoners that were rounded up during the revolution from 1979 until the mid 80s, like basically everyone who said, wait, this is fucked up, we should stop this, all of them were sent to prison and almost all of them were hung. So that's the 5,000 political prisoners. These are not molesters or rapists or people who ran red lights. These are people in prison because they said no to the government, and the government killed them. In 2022, a huge new uprising has began. And so now if you study what's called the revolution in Iran, you might be looking at stuff during 79, you might be looking at stuff that's happened in the last 2 years. Mahsa Amini, no offense to anyone, is not a special person. She is the person around whom the current revolution is taking place, but she is just another woman who was beaten to death by the police. So if you can imagine something like our version, the Iranian women, our version of George Floyd. George Floyd wasn't that special. He was another Black guy beaten to death by the police. One amongst many, hundreds, thousands. And so here's our icon, Mahsa Amini. We say that she is a symbol of the revolution, but you should just know if you look into the case, she was in public, she was showing her hair. The police took her, and now she's dead. So here's a few of the events. September 16, a huge protest breaks out. Hundreds of people take to the streets. The police shoot bullets into the crowd, like live bullets, like gun, now you're dead. The police shoot peaceful protesters. In mid-September, the Iranian government shut down the internet. So already things like Instagram and WhatsApp and YouTube are highly censored, and you can't hardly communicate with your friends unless you're whispering around street corners, but then they shut down the internet. So how do you organize a protest if you can't talk to anyone? October 1st, around the world, about 1 million people gathered in Germany, in France, in America, all over the world. 150 different cities protested on October 1st. And so this is our Be Our Voice, hashtag Be Our Voice. If the people in Iran can't protest because they're being murdered, maybe the people outside of Iran should protest. And on October 2nd, as a retaliation, 2,000 people who were living on the campus and studying at the campus were trapped, shot at, beaten, tortured, raped, and then sent to prison to later die. People in Iran are still protesting. People in Iran are still being shot at and dying. We know for a fact that Iran has been killing anyone who is caught doing anything against the government. But people around the world are fighting this. 71 children have been killed. 530 protesters have been killed. These are just the facts, right? So this is like a huge human rights activist news agency. This is all the provable stuff. So you know these numbers are underrated. 180 children have been arrested. 4 people have been publicly hung. Let's talk about those people that have been publicly hung. Their charge, amongst other things, is enmity against God. So the government is saying, you're doing something against God by saying that we're bad, so we're going to kill you. One of the gentlemen had a lawyer, don't know how that happened, but apparently he did. The lawyer saw him and realized that he had been tortured before he was publicly hung. There are lots of people sitting on death row right now. The youngest one is 19 years old. And what are we doing to, what is the Islamic Republic of Iran doing to the women? The women that are taken to prison are raped and then murdered. In Islamic law, technically, you're not allowed to kill a virgin. So what do? First you rape her, then you marry her. You marry her so that you can justify having sex with her. Now that she's not a virgin, you can kill her. And we know for a fact that the Islamic Republic of Iran is doing this. The United Nations has reported that we need to go in. Iran is denying everything and denying people to come in to investigate. But we do have proof. And the government's denying everything. Recently, the government has been either doing it or allowing it, poisoning schoolgirls. 7,000 schoolgirls have been poisoned since October. October, November, December, January, February, March, April. So in the last 7 months, 7,000 girls have been attacked. Again, these are just the provable stuff, right? So like how many more? And here is a video. Well, I just put a screenshot to not make you vomit. A video of the police beating a woman for asking what's going on in the school where her child was poisoned. So imagine you drop your kid off at school. There's a poisoning. You go to ask what the hell is going on. Where's your kid? They're in the hospital. What happened? And then they beat you. There was a journalist who was reporting on this. He's been arrested and now he's missing. We have absolutely no idea where this guy is. The newspapers that were reporting these poisonings have been shut down, and some of them, 3 of them, are facing criminal charges for publishing rumors. So like no free press, no free speech. And this is the history of the last 100 years. So from the 20s until 79 was the Pahlavi era. They were making Iran like America. From 79 to 2023, Iran is a very different place. I want to say it's the Islamic Republic of Iran, but that title kind of pisses me off because if you look at Muslims, if you read the Quran, nowhere in there does it say kill someone, rape someone. Here's our question. Is what Iran is doing ethical? If we know what Iran is doing, and if we know that what it's doing is unethical, then are we assholes for sitting here and not doing anything? Like, are we obligated to go and help? Imagine that you knew that my husband was beating me. You see it all the time, and you don't tell anyone. Can we say, you should tell? You should go help her. You know what's happening. Go help. I don't know. Let's talk about our values. What do we value? Do we value freedom and fighting oppression? I don't know. In the Declaration of Independence of the United States, it says that all men are created equal. And this is not people with penises. This is human. This is mankind. All of us are created equal. And we have inalienable rights, rights that cannot be foreign to us, rights that cannot be stripped of us. And those include, according to the United States Constitution, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I don't know. Do you agree? Liberty, not being oppressed. Freedom, being able to think as you want without being hindered. Do you think that these are important? So let me tell you some things that I believe that I think makes me very American. You cannot limit freedom without losing freedom. If we have freedom of speech, I should be able to get up here and say Biden sucks. I should be able to get up here and say Trump sucks. I should be able to say whatever I want, whether you agree with me or not. Here's something I believe, that if you are living your life without freedom, you're kind of like a robot, somebody else's puppet. And I think that freedom is not like bread, in the sense that with bread, you can satisfy a little bit of your hunger, but with freedom, you either have it or you don't. With freedom, either we are all free or none of us are free. Here's something else that I believe. You can't say, well, I'm not Iranian, so I don't care that they're being murdered. Or I'm not a woman, so I don't care that they're being murdered. Or I'm not a Jew, so I don't care that they're being murdered. I think we all need to stand up for everybody. If we value liberty for humans, I think you're not free if you see someone is oppressed and you're not using your freedom to go free them. How can you call yourself free if you feel like you don't have the ability to go and stop an oppressor? I think Iran's actions are unethical. I think we are unethical for ignoring it. Silence is complacency. Let's talk about some normative ethical theories. Because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Iran's actions are not unethical. And if they're not, then we have no problem finding out that kids are being murdered at school and we do nothing, right? So let's think about it. What's a normative ethical theory? Okay, well, on my YouTube channel, I have a bunch of videos, all sorts of branches on philosophy. One of those branches is called normative ethical theories. And in my YouTube video called What is Normativity? I discuss that normativity is talking about how things should be. You're smiling. Yeah, I'm advertising. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Normativity is talking about how things should be. You are not describing how things are, you are prescribing how things should be. So every time you're making a normative claim, you're saying what people should or should not do. Normative epistemic claims, epistemic means relating to knowledge, those are the things that you should or should not believe. Normative aesthetic claims, aesthetic means something having to do with art. If you say something like you should not paint with red on black, you're saying what I should and should not do if I want to be artistic. Going to ethics, normative ethical claims tell you what you should and should not do as your habits. Normative ethical theories have this question in their background: what are the standards for what actions are wrong? Like if you want to say that something's bad, according to what standard is it bad? I'm going to talk about three of them. One normative ethical claim is called deontology from the philosopher Immanuel Kant. In deontology, you say what's bad or wrong or unethical according to whether it fails the standard of being universalizable, of being what any reasonable person would conclude. In deontology, you believe that the rational will commands what is righteous. And the rational will is what you desire because you're rational. According to divine command theory, what is right or ethical, what is wrong or unethical, is whatever is commanded by God. So if you find that God commands you to take your son and kill him, then that's what you should do. That would be ethical. We applaud Abraham because Abraham was faithful to God. God said, Abraham, take your son and kill him. And Abraham was about to. And that's great. According to divine command theory, ethical is whatever God says to do. Let's talk about utilitarianism. This is a different normative ethical theory. And this is the theory that says that what is ethical is whatever produces the most amount of pleasure, least amount of pain for the most amount of people that we actually care about. Because you like bring in moral theories, yeah. So here's three different sets of standards. So when you want to say something is wrong, is it wrong because a reasonable person wouldn't do it? Is it wrong because God says not to do it? Is it wrong because it would be bad for the most amount of people involved? Let's ask about Iran's actions. Let's do some applied ethics. This is where we take the ethical theories and we apply them to actual actions. Let's think about different things that we know about Iran. I told you about a lot. Did you know that last year Iran convicted 2 women and sentenced them to death? What did they do? On social media, they posted that the LGBTQ community could use a little more support. Homosexuality is illegal and punishable by death, but you're also not allowed to talk about it on social media. So just last year, 2 women sentenced to death for talking about LGBTQ+. 2 weeks ago, a woman was hijabless in a shop, and a man came in and attacked her with yogurt. He took yogurt from the grocery store, poured it on her head, started hitting her with it. and the shopkeeper came around and pushed that guy out of his store. The whole thing's on video, so you can find it. And on April 1st, the president came out to say, well, the hijab is the law. And he warned the shopkeeper for kicking out the guy who attacked the woman. What's today, the 5th? This is days ago. We're talking current events. A woman is attacked for showing her hair in public. And the guy who helped her got in trouble. Can you imagine? By the president. Okay. Is what they're doing ethical? Well, according to deontology, the answer is a clear no. Clear no. That one's easy. If you want to talk about this one, we can do it in a Q&A. But according to divine command theory, you can argue that what Iran is doing, if you find excerpts in the Quran or in the Hadith that explain that what they're doing is fine. So this one's a little tricky. This one's a little tricky because if you say, well, in Islam, you're allowed to force your wife to have sex with you, and then the government is just adopting that as their national law, then it is ethical, according to divine command theory. So anything God commands is right, even if he commands rape or murder, torture, whatever he commands. That's Islamic law, interpreted by the Islamic Republic of Iran and the representatives. Not necessarily this is what Muslims believe, but this is what the Muslims in government believe. So maybe this is just cultural relativism. Look, you guys, people in Africa do African things, people in Russia do Russian things, people in Iran do Iranian things. Live and let live. Who the hell are you to go there and tell them that they need to change? It's relative, right? Okay, but here's the problem. Iranians are not Muslim, historically. The Aryans were Zoroastrian, and they were invaded by Muslim Arabs. And the Arabs have enforced Islam on the now Iranian people. So it's not their culture. The people who are being oppressed in Iran right now are being oppressed according to the interpretation of the Ayatollah, of the Quran. It's not even their own book. So that doesn't really make sense, but you could argue it if you wanted to. Here's another problem. In Quran, it says that being Muslim, being a person who submits their will to God, is a choice. You are not allowed to force anybody to become a Muslim. So the whole idea of enforcing Islamic law on civilians doesn't make sense according to Muslim law. It must be a choice. And the Iranians don't have a choice. And the people who say, we shouldn't do this are being publicly hung, raped, tortured. According to utilitarianism, you can argue that what Iran is doing is ethical. If it benefits the most amount of people, which is what utilitarianism wants, then it's ethical. The only way to argue that Iran's actions are unethical is to convince people that it's actually worse for the majority. Well, tens of thousands of people have been imprisoned in Iran, so we know tens of thousands of people don't like what's happening. And we know millions of people outside of Iran have protested. And these are just the protesters, right? This isn't like, I think it's pretty fucked up what they're doing. This is the people who are going into the streets and publicly standing up and saying this is unjust. Tens of thousands of people in Iran, millions of people worldwide. So in utilitarianism, yes and no, what they're doing is right. In divine command theory, same thing, but in deontology, no. And the question here is, okay, so we can't argue that it's wrong. We can't argue that it's not wrong. What should we do? What should we do? That's one question. What are we obligated to do? That's another question. And both of those are my questions. Like, I know that if I grew up in Iran, I'd probably be killed right now because I'd be on some burning trash can yelling for justice. And then they'd kill me because I don't shut up. But I'm in America. Lucky me. What should I do? I even call myself an American. I say I value freedom. So what am I obligated to do? Let's go to some global considerations. Maybe you think we should not go to Iran and help people. There's people who are suffering in America. People in America have problems. We've got homelessness. We've got disease. We've got impoverished education. Why would we be sending money to help people in Iran? Maybe you think that way. In 2021, we sent $38 billion to other countries to help them. Raise your hand if you pay taxes. You paid taxes. That's your money. Where did it go? 38 billion American dollars were sent from the American people who pay taxes to Ethiopia, to Jordan. Here's the top 10 countries we have funded. And do you think that's a lot? Do you think that's a shit ton? Wait for it. Wait for it. This is 2021, where the most amount of money we sent out went to Ethiopia, $1.13 billion. The next year, we decided we're going to give $115 billion to Ukraine. So were you freaking out about this? Because this is a percentage of what we're sending to Ukraine. Like right now, your money that you work for is going out of the country. 38 billion, but then the next year 115 just to Ukraine. We're still helping Ethiopians. We're still helping all the other nations. This is just how much we allocated for Ukraine. This is from April 4th. What's that? Yesterday, the Biden administration just agreed to send $500 million more in equipment, and in addition, another $2.1 billion for an emergency fund to Ukraine. Now, why are we helping the oppressed civilians in Ukraine by giving their government money, but not helping the oppressed civilians in Iran, yet giving their government money? I say that because we're not actually going to Ukraine and finding poor people and hurt people and helping them. We're giving the money to the government, right? It's not the same. We're not boots on the ground helping the people who are in pain. But we're sending money to Iran. We're sending money to Iran right now. Iran has some American hostages, and we're thinking about unfreezing some sanctioned accounts so that we can trade, giving them money that they can use to kill their own people in exchange for some Americans. I don't know. Should we be doing that? I don't know, because that's like happening now. Happening yesterday. What's worse is that we are funding Iran, and Iran is funding Russia. In 2022, Iran armed Russia with 100 drones for Ukraine. Why are we helping the oppressed civilians in Ukraine, but not helping the people in North Korea? Did you know that more than 70% of the civilians in North Korea, or so we believe, have some kind of malnourishment? A woman who escaped, look up her name, Parker, wrote 2 books now and a few TED Talks about how terrible it is. It is illegal to find a non-North Korean article or music or anything. They have no WhatsApp, no Instagram, no YouTube, no nothing. Everything they have is from their own country. But we're not helping them. So now you know what's happening in Iran. And here, again, are my questions. If we value freedom, what does it obligate us to do when we find out someone is oppressed? And then how do we choose who we help and who we don't help? I know we're helping Ukraine, and it's because we're trying to get some natural resources, and we're helping Taiwan because we need our phones to work. Is it just because of the natural resources? Does that justify helping them because they live on land that we need? Is it ethical for us to ignore oppression unless it hurts us? Is it ethical for us to only help the people that benefit us? Thank you for your time.